Sounds great. Yeah, I apologize. I missed the one meeting and I was a little confused as to like what we were wanting to do and how I could help. So,
right. So there's a couple problems here. Let me see if I can switch my screen here. There's a separation of concerns problem that I want to invoke. Like SIG cluster lifecycle cares about the packages, which are like the debs and the RPMs and any other packaging aspect, right? So the problem is the build, right, currently produces artifacts that are sort of auto-generated. They're genned artifacts. And there's a conflation of this problem that exists, right? The conflation of the problem is that in order to do this, they run Bazel. And Bazel basically generates a .spec file that's used in a .deb file, or whatever the packaging is for the Debian, the GUI that basically outlines here are the details, .foo. Right. Now, to me, this is very conflating, right? Because the problems that exist with Bazel and conflating this problem is that I don't mind filling in templates information that gets filled into the spec and the Debian packaging, but it doesn't make any sense to conflate it with Bazel because there's other build issues with Bazel. So what we could do is we could have Bazel have a run a script, right? What I want to do is decouple this bit first, right? But I also want to stop trying to build two separate packaging and sucking at both of them, right? We currently don't create canonicalized spec files. We don't create well-defined sort of idiomatic Debian files either. So if we're not going to really be up to muster with regards to the standard practices that exist in these distributions, we should not try to pretend to do packaging independently. And 90% of the stuff gets replicated across both, right? So the first step was like, there are common schemas that allow us to get rid of the redundancy here. And one of those things is NFMPM, I think, or NFPM, I don't remember. It's in the issue, right? And basically that's just a YAML file, right? So, okay, that's good, right? So we could have a YAML file, but we don't really want it to be fully YAMLed. We want it to be like a templated, like a Go template for a YAML, just very minimal Go template for a YAML, right? So it'd be YAML.in. Because we want to do the overrides where Bazel could, call a script to allow the overrides to flow through, right? So that way you could have a build, which then calls a script, which then overrides a YAML.in to produce a YAML, which then gets called by the NFMPM, which then produces .deb and .rpm. Now, in an ideal world, what I really wanted was like, this doesn't even get exposed to a user anymore. And we actually produce a meta container, which contains the repository for this information. And then a person just calls like kubeadm install from a container. And then it, depending upon the distro, it just installs the correct thing. That's what I've always wanted. I've always been pushed back against that, but I want to stop and see what you folks think.
Marek, do you have any questions about the diagram?
No, I think it makes sense. This actually clarifies a lot of what I was, trying to understand.
So
I actually also really like the container idea where it just does what it needs to, and you can just obfuscate all of that. But
so then we'd have the building apparatus to do this. Like, I don't think we can get rid of these today, like, because that's what all the instructions are. That's where people are used to consuming it. But I do think we can start to produce this thing, right? And
right, it could be like a beta.
Yeah, it could be, well, alpha at first, but yeah.
Yeah.
But it would just be a kubeADM container, right? Which would contain all the artifacts and everything else you need to basically get started with initialization of kubeADM, right? So in the atomic landscape, this would be like an atomic install container. So the RPM would exist inside of there, but the systemd unit file and the container would be overridden, so that way it could, on initialization or startup of a host machine, it could basically run the container that has the kubelet inside it that does the stuff, right? So this could be a kubeADM container. This is like a stretch goal, right? We don't need to do this. I think this is cool. This is what ultimately I've wanted to do in the end game of things, but we need to do this. Like, this is the cut line for 114. This needs to get done, right? You turned on your video, Lubomir.
I'm just fiddling with my camera again, sorry. Observe how it's turned super dark again. Anyway, I mean, I wanted to make a comment here that like how are we going to build the multi-arch binaries?
So the script that gets called, right, it's from the main repository. The script that gets called would then have an override for YAML.in that produces the output file, right? So this script is the controller that would allow us to basically do the meta information that is currently this massive thunk that lives inside of Anago, right? So this is like the intermediary that we'd have to define. So this is not defined. We'd have to basically rip out portions of Anago into this location for how we want, or portions of requirements for how we want to do this into this location, do this, right? So I think the first step, but this also gets rid of the Bazel problem, right? Currently the release stuff calls make release, right? It doesn't actually use the Bazel build for the release process. And this way, in the release repository, when it calls make release could actually call this script with whatever predefined stuff we need that does the right thing.
Okay. I made a comment about like Bazel still lacking the multi-arch functionality, and Jeff Grafton replied that he has a working prototype. My understanding is that this is some sort of a hack where he was able to generate multi-arch artifacts using Bazel somehow. But I guess the scope here is to refactor in such a way that we basically want this abstracted YAML file, and we can still use make release with the regular type instead of Bazel.
Yes.
Okay.
And that way you decouple all of this generated goo that's currently inside of Bazel. Bazel has a bunch of generated stuff to build the spec file and to build the Debian package, and then it calls the actual build artifacts. And I don't think that belongs in Bazel. I think Bazel can call a kicker that can generate what is the equivalent of a spec file, but I don't think Bazel should own that bit, right? And that decouples it so that way we can just move forwards. And if we need to make release or Bazel, we'd be fine.
So yes. In terms of the script, do you think that it is a good idea to instead write this in Go instead of Bash?
I don't care. It could be whatever we want it to be. It could be Go. We could basically forklift pieces of Anago. I think that would be like the next step. I think the first step is like just getting this stuff from this pipeline to work with existing things, right? Just testing it out independently. You don't even need to be in KK. You can just copy out the existing spec and Debian packaging file, convert it into a YAML.in or a YAML file that you want, and just test the packaging creation of NFNPM or NFPM. Still too many acronyms in my brain, because that could be tested independently, right? And that way a person can move on it really fast without having to worry about Kubernetes isms or stuff.
Yeah, I guess it can be tested without Anago even.
Yes, you don't need anything. That's the whole purpose, is like to be able to move fast.
Because if we start like moving code from Anago in Bash, basically Anago is in Bash. And Marek, I'm not sure you know that Anago is the release tool for Kubernetes. It lives in the Kubernetes release repository.
Okay. Okay. Cool. I'll go check it out.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to check it out, but
Yeah, my point, I guess, is that if we start, like, we have to put some code in KK, because that's my understanding. We have to move the what is in Anago in terms of logic currently. We have to move it in KK.
well, some of it, yes.
Yes, my point is that we should probably refactor as part of the same pass instead of like moving Bash and then refactoring in Go. And
Yeah,
so that okay.
So if you want to do that, like this is the partial Anago intermediary goopery that would live here. Like, I think the generation of the artifacts is kind of separate, right? And we can do this piece like today, right? Like we can get this done. We can start working on this. We can get the build container we need for this up. So the problem here is like we need to actually create a build container that exercises npm and then generates the output artifacts. But this one here of just creating the YAML, creating the Docker file for this container, and then making sure that this pipeline works, it is like step 0. And there's nothing preventing us from doing that and getting that started. The next step would be remove this junk from the existing build files, right? Well, we'd have to get this script would be, I guess, the next step, and then remove this junk and swap it.
Yes. So there are some questions like, where are we going to put the files in KK as well? Is it supposed to be in hack? I mean, this folder is.
I would use the build directory. I wouldn't use hack. Hack is basically the scripts that get executed. You might put this thing into hack. I don't know. I think it lives underneath build. It's more of a builder tool than it is. The hack stuff is mainly meant for like the scriptery. It's like legacy things for a lot of the bash isms that exist. But we could determine that as a separate issue, right? Like I still don't have a full definition of what this is. I think once we figure out the YAML file that we want that unifies these incantations and what areas we want to template, this script will start to take shape, and we'll have to look at how Anago does some of its scoopery and potentially eliminate that.
I can see that it copies the artifacts to a temporary folder, something like that, and then based on a temporary folder, you have to execute this nfpm container.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. So why do we need the container for this nfpm?
It's the build container. You need something to be the builder. Otherwise, you'd have to have the tools installed. So you can either be a container or it could be a dependency inside of the tool chain.
Mm-hmm. So the build is already happening in a container, and I guess we have to exit the original build container and enter this specific nfpm container.
Well, the build is in Bazel, and Bazel is localized to the host, right? So currently, the way the builds are running for CI automation, Bazel is a localized host environment, so you need all the Bazel dependencies and all the other build artifacts to build, and then it generates I don't exactly recall how Bazel goes from spec to generating the RPMs. They're not running RPM build locally, I don't think, and the deb thing locally. I think they're running a container, which then does its business.
So it's Bazel that is starting the container. It's not our make files directly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But this needs some, like, I guess, testing, engineering, like, to figure out how are we going to proceed with this extra container.
Which one? This one, the NFPM container?
Yes, yes, yes.
You need a Docker. It basically copies the exact same thing of the RPM builder or whatever the Uber builder container. Copy the from line, but then you'd have to add the artifacts for that tool.
I see. And possibly Go, if we are going to use Go for modifying the .in file.
Well, I think this process is separate, right? Like this thing, this is why I said like this is step 0. This is a separate piece of the puzzle. Then here, once we've done this part, then we can step back and take a look at how we want to structure this piece and eliminate the other basilisms that exist.
Okay, and where? So we should output these the depths and RPMs in a folder, I guess, somewhere.
Yeah, exactly the same location that gets outputted currently.
Yeah. So it was built again, I think.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, is this NFMPM or are you talking about NFPM?
NFPM. Well, that's the acronym escapes me. So it's in the link. It's in the link of the issue.
I'm fetching it right now. I'm fetching the exact name.
You're talking about a simple deb and RPM package written in Go, packager written in Go?
Yes.
Okay, it's NFPM. But anyways, I just wanted to make sure that I was like, I've never heard of that before, and it could just be me because.
Well, it's based upon the legacy system that exists. The NFPM is the Go version of the legacy system, which is like been around for eons, right?
Oh, the FPM?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
So if it's written in Go, can we vendor it and use it as a library, or should we use it as a CLI?
I'm going to leave that to folks to investigate. Whether or not we want to containerize it or whether or not we want to vendor it and make it part of the build tool chain.
Mm-hmm. That's a very interesting like aspect that we have to investigate, yes.
I was going to say, I think it would depend on the number of like dependencies and whatnot.
Exactly, right? Like if you loop that in and all of a sudden you need to include the universe, because at the end of the day, it's going to do some type of, you know, builder apparatus thing, which usually needs some type of cheroot mechanism, right? Almost all of these systems use some form of cheroot. In which case, that's when you want to build it into a container because doing it on the local system becomes super weird, right? So the builder container would then make a ton more sense. So it requires investigation.
Yes, we can potentially also combine, I guess, the start, the script. I mean, the script with the other part.
Eventually, yeah. I mean, eventually we could do that all in one thunk. Well, I'm gonna try to, in my traditional model, like where we have people working on different things, this is one thing that people can just focus on and just get that thing done. And then we can take a step back and then focus on this thing and then rationalize these two and do the mental cha-cha that's going to be required of like, this is how this works. Okay, this is how we need to modify this stuff, and then go back and forth and refine it. Eventually though, yes, you could potentially do that.
So there were some comments about an FPM inside the cap that Hannes did, and
Yeah.
we probably should look at them because I saw, I think, some minor concerns from somebody that had experience with the tool.
With NFPM or FPM? Because FPM is super old.
The new one.
So the Go race version of it. Sure, mm-hmm. we can look at that. I think the hard requirement would be FPM, right? I think, you know, whether or not we use NFPM, it seems nice because it's in Go, but I did not dig, right? But FPM is old as time, right? Like since, like, I don't know, 10 years old. What is it?
So it basically serves as the abstraction layer for the
for
Deb and
packaging.
RP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if we're not going to build, if you're not going to build canonical packages, let's not like lie to ourselves. Let's do less work, because otherwise we're duplicating stuff across everything. Right?
I mean that was probably part of the problem. So people were talking about that it's not sufficient for generating RPMs or something like that. So
Define
yeah,
sufficient, right? Like sufficient.
it's not.
Like,
Yeah, our current RPMs, it cannot generate them. It cannot abstract the Debian and RPMs in a good way, so that it's sufficient for our current demands for RPM, something like that.
I think that's probably horse dookie, because we're not doing anything special, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because nothing we are doing in our packages today is unique, interesting, or domain specific to the actual vendor or to the distribution. We pretty much putting stuff in the same locations across both because they're both systemd-ified distros now. So I don't see any rationale that, I think it requires investigation, to be honest. I think there might be some isms that might not be met across both, but somebody needs to investigate that.
So, because I'm not much of an expert in Linux packaging, we can use these sources to generate for any version of a particular distro. Is that correct?
I think they're more generic-ish, like the generic-ish style packaging. So like the packages we produce today are very generic. They're not actually specific to a given distribution, except for the Debian ones that we produce were actually originally made for 1604. So it's kind of, yeah. But you can make generic-ish style packages that are not version dependent. And people have done that for years across different upstream providers, right?
Yeah. I'm just looking at the contents of the build folder right now. So how are we going to distribute the work here?
I think someone needs to do this, like order 0 of the day. Like I said, like folks need to sign up to actually execute on this and work on it. I can help review it once it's in flight and ready to go, and I'll kick the tires on it. But I don't have bandwidth at all personally to do this piece of the puzzle. That I think is a starting point. Without that, we have nothing. Right?
I mean, I can jump on that. I'm not an expert in Linux packaging either. Despite working for SUSE, but but I mean, I do know about Linux packaging, especially RPM, since that's what we use. Debs, I'm a little bit more shaky on.
Yes, and I haven't used RPM since the late 90s, pretty much.
Yeah, as an ex-Red Hatter, I can tell you all of the intricate details about domain-specific, RPMs for different distributions, but it doesn't apply to anything we're doing, right? Like at all. So it would just be like, let me talk some foreign language to you, try to have you decipher all of it.
Right. Yes. OpenSUSE uses RPMs as well, but.
You guys also have this custom package manager, Zipper, I think.
Yeah, doesn't every distribution have its own package manager?
Yeah, I think that's the thing.
And that's my problem with the Linux ecosystem, and that's why I don't want to touch any of that. Yes, we had a discussion on how are we going to package Windows, and I basically explained that you have to zip a folder and add some sort of a script in there. It's pretty much done, and it's going to work for Windows XP as long as Windows XP is 64 bits.
Somebody, I don't even know if Wix project even exists anymore, but like the last time I did stuff was generic, was like make CMake-isms that did auto build generation with stuff with Wix. And that was a special territory.
Before working for SUSE, which has only been for like 6 months, I was a Windows developer and I actually used Wix.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know.
Anyways, I'm not going to care about Wix. I think that's up to the Windows folks to care about what they want to do and how they want to generate and distro stuff. Yeah, it's not part of our problem. It's not even in SIG cluster lifecycles like test jiggery at all, right? So,
Perfect.
exactly.
So in terms of like who, I mean, we're definitely driving here, but in terms of who is actually supposed to fix this, I'm sure that Tim, you agree that this is SIG release, and they should have release engineers that fix this stuff. But yeah,
It's weird because this is where SIG cluster, ideally, if they actually had people who were deep into our SIG and could report out, then I would be happy to do that. But there aren't people that do that, right? Like the problem is somebody would be able to straddle SIG release and SIG cluster lifecycle, then and do that work and love it. Then that makes sense. But there's no one who's ever done that. So what happens is we own the packages and we pay the price of release. So it's like how can I like, you know, be stuck between a rock and a hard place in perpetuity? So I think for us to be able to generate the packages that we need to get us out of this conundrum that we've been in for, I don't know, what year is it now? I don't know, 2 years, 3 years? 2 years. I think Kubanium is only 2 years old. So we've been in this kind of purgatory for 2 years. We need to exit it now because it's untenable, right?
Tim Pepper wanted to hire an extra engineer in our team who is basically a release engineer, dedicated like Linux specialist, containers, build systems. But we are still not, we haven't acquired this engineer.
They're like unicorns.
Yes, definitely. So I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. Zuwaidi, you joined. Can you help us with this effort for refactoring the build system in Kubernetes?
Yeah, hey folks. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm a little bit late for this meeting. I'm sorry if my connection is too low. I'm away from civilization here in Tunisia. So I'm trying to follow up with this meeting, I think, after the recording video.
You missed the beginning of the meeting where Tim explained the current structure in more detail, but we are going to post a recording later that you can watch the beginning. And this is going to help you understand. Like, I mean, we have to start with some PRs, I guess. So work in progress, stuff like that. I'm not sure how are we going to approach.
Would we do a PR or just, I mean, for the zero goal there on the whiteboard, can we just do it in some repository that we share as we're just trying to get something that works?
I think we should do it in outside of KK. Probably you can clone. I think at first you can clone Kubernetes and try to do the work outside of PRs.
Right, just like in my own fork.
Exactly. You could do it in our fork, and you can work with another person on your fork. So you can invite them to work on that. We do that all the time with large feature changes. So that's a recommended path for how you do this. And you can do all kinds of weird stuff there. But before you kind of get a PR ready in place, do the squashing and basically merge squash all the things into a single change.
Something else we might face is like convincing stakeholders in the build folder, in hack folder. Danago change, the removals for Manago might be interesting. I'm hoping that we not block that much, because I've seen PRs block for months and months and months.
Oh no, well, with this particular work, I will assert that it depends upon what area it is, and if I'm stepping on anybody's toes. So traditionally, I won't, come in with my velveted gloved iron fist, but with this particular work, I will. So
Sounds good.
yeah. So we'll have dominion over that work. And I have plenty of fodder to fire against other stuff if somebody tries to stop it.
I mean, yes, Marek, if you create in your fork this initial work, you can also ping people in the C-class lifecycle channel to take a look, and maybe others can join the effort. You can give them access to the branch and stuff like that. I can also help, but I originally wanted to help on the testing aspect because I have other things to do as well, like the whole testing apparatus. I decided to participate in that, so I can test the artifacts definitely, the depths and RPMs also, and test jobs. So Fabrizio made a good point last night that he does not see our plan for testing these artifacts. So do you think, Tim, that I should make a somewhere about that? Like, because the plan is not clear to me yet still. Like,
These would be the artifacts to replace the existing ones, right? So once we have all the jiggery in place, we do a live switch on a PR. The live switch would basically remove the Basel generation of these artifacts and then switch over to the new generation.
at the same time, when we move to kind, the way we are going to do it is we are going to rebuild the artifacts that we need, and possibly on demand. And we are not going to download depths and RPMs in test jobs. So the plan, at least what I spoke to Ben on this subject specifically, is to create separate test jobs about the artifacts. So basically, a job spawning a container, like a Red Hat container, installing RPMs inside of it. If it's all good, the test is green, things like that.
Okay, that seems a little bit separate. We can deal with that as it rolls, but I don't see anything right now that would prevent this work from going on and eventually flowing into how we get the kind testing up and running.
Okay.
Okay, so I will tonight, after I'm done working, I will create the repository and I will start the initial work. And Lumir, I would love your comments on it. As I get some stuff, I'll ping you, and if you have time.
Yeah, I can take a look. But I mean, possibly after you set up like the NPM or NFPM first, like the abstraction layer, maybe we can have more folks looking at it. I mean, Rusty is also done a lot of jiggery around installing packages and stuff, so he can also take a look at that. We also have some other folks, but I don't want to burden anyone.
No, I'll post it in Cluster Lifecycle once I have something up.
Yes, I mean, everybody can bike shed on Linux stuff, so definitely, hopefully, that is going to be to our advantage.
Great. Sounds like we have a plan. Are there any other?
Yeah. My other concern, that I'm always concerned about stuff, is that we have. So how can we? I'm going to open the release schedule for 1.14. Mm-hmm. 1.14, because we have to define if like, are we going to go into code freeze with this stuff?
It's too soon. Code freeze is still way far away. So feature freeze is coming up, but that's independent. We're not really adding a feature. We're basically paying down a tremendous amount of tech debt, which might be a feature to some people, I guess.
Well, it has a cap. I mean, so in terms of that cap that already exists,
that's independent. I'm gonna let Hannes deal with whatever's. I think our aspect of this. I told Hannes that, you know, we're still going to truck against all this stuff from SIG cluster lifecycle, but as soon as like you have a plan for how you want to do publishing with regards to the scriptery, that script bubble, this bubble here, you know, and how it gets executed from the release process, then we're all ears, right? I don't know if we'll get the full thing done this cycle, because I don't know. SIG release has not been known to, they're not necessarily owners of code all the time, right? Because Anago has been underneath their purview forever, and it just kind of lives on in perpetuity instead of getting cleaned up and changed and modified and refactored and stuff. So that's an example of where, you know, unless ownership needs to be kind of taken over by SIG release to do that build modification and potentially the scriptery. I just want to get the tool chain started this cycle to get us out of this mess. Ideally, I would like to get it done so that these are the artifacts that we publish that is actually part of the release, so that everything we use uses the standard KK repo for building.
okay, we basically have a month, unless we can go with this work in code freeze. Do you think we can still do it during?
Oh, I think we're definitely in that boat where we can. It's just a question of, do we have the counterparts on the release side of things to help us get the Anago stuff done and the other modifications in the script that we potentially would need to get all the release stuff in place? That's an open-ended question. I don't know.
Hopefully we don't get blocked because SIG release says like, hey, you should stop with this work. We cannot do refactor during the final days of the release or something.
Yeah, but the whole purpose of doing it in this order is that we do this flip over last, right? So all of this standard generation of everything still occurs. We do the final change at the last point. You know, it's kind of like you're building a new highway, you know, just want to put cars on it before you're actually done, right?
I mean, ideally, we should have gotten somebody of the capacity like Jeff Grafton to take a look at this, and he should do it. But yeah, we are going to try. Because Jeff is obviously an expert in building Kubernetes, but he doesn't have the time.
I don't think anyone has the time. This is why a SIG needs to own it and drive it, right? Because like it's gone in its life cycle, and we've kind of limped it along forever. So
yeah,
building is easy. You just do /build run make.
Yes. So the first time I cloned Kubernetes, it failed for me because so I basically cloned the folder and moved it to another location, and that completely broke symlinks and stuff. And my first issue in the Kubernetes issue tracker was, I cannot build Kubernetes, please help. And nobody responded, and then I realized that it's going to be a fun project to work on.
Okay, on that note, why don't we end the call?
Okay.
I'll post, I might trim some things. I'll post this to SIG cluster lifecycle channel, and we'll try to see if we can loop other folks who missed it into this, and let's get this rolling.
Right, sounds good. Thank you.
Yep, take care.
Thank you.
Bye.